This story is titled, My Cheating Ex-Wife Sued Me, thinking she will get the house and my money, but in the end, she lost and had to pay child support. Karma is a bitch. Hey everyone, if you're enjoying these stories and want to support the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps our channel. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, Hi all, I don't usually post personal stuff here, but I wanted to tell this story because it's been a wild ride. And honestly, I could use some outside perspective, or maybe just some validation. I'll give you some context of how and why we divorced before exposing her after divorce games. Bear with me. So, when my ex-wife, Sarah, female, and I, male, decided to have kids, it felt like the start of a new chapter in life, one filled with promise. At the time, I was 32, working as an engineer, and earning enough to give us a comfortable lifestyle. Sarah, at 29, was doing well as a marketing associate. We were a team, or so I thought. The first sign that things were shifting came shortly after our daughter Emma was born. Sarah sat across the dinner table one evening, pushing around the food on her plate, and said, I think it's time I quit my job. She made it sound so practical, like it was all about the baby. Daycare is expensive, and you're doing so well at work. It just makes sense, she explained. I didn't push back much. I loved Emma, and if staying home with her made Sarah happy, I figured it was a win-win. But within a week, her priorities started showing themselves. The first request was a new car. Her old sedan wasn't cutting it anymore. Do you really want me driving our baby around in something that unreliable? She asked. I caved. It seemed reasonable at the time. Then came the clothes. None of my pre-baby wardrobe fits, she said, as if she hadn't been complaining about her outdated style even before Emma was born. When I hesitated, she threw in, It's not just for me. I need to look put together for Emma's sake. Spa appointments soon became a weekly thing. Her reasoning? Pregnancy changes your body in ways you'll never understand. At first, I didn't say anything. She'd been through a tough pregnancy, and I thought she deserved to feel good about herself. But as the months went on, it started to feel less like Sarah was focusing on Emma, and more like she was focusing on herself. I'd come home after a 10-hour shift to find Sarah scrolling through her phone, Emma playing alone in her playpen. When I'd suggest we spend some time together as a family, Sarah would sigh and say, I've been with her all day. You take over for a while. Bedtime routines were completely on me. I was fine with it at first, but because of my job, I needed some help too. As Emma grew older, Sarah's spending habits didn't slow down. She joined a mom's group, but treated it more like a social club than a support network. She'd meet her friends for lunch at upscale cafes, always ordering the most expensive items on the menu. When I suggested we set a budget to manage our growing expenses, Sarah laughed. What's the point of making all this money if we're going to live like we're broke? She said. It stung. I'd been working overtime, missing out on moments with Emma, and Sarah's response felt dismissive. By the time our son, Ethan, who was 2 years old, the cracks in our relationship had turned into chasms. Sarah kept doing the same things, spent her days shopping online, planning vacations we couldn't afford, and attending fitness classes. Any talk of cutting back was met with resistance. It's for the kids, she'd say, but it was hard to see how her latest designer handbag was benefiting Emma or Ethan. Her disdain for any kind of parenting responsibility became clearer with time. When Emma started preschool, Sarah rarely attended parent-teacher meetings. What's the point? She said. It's not like they're teaching calculus. I started to feel like a single parent, even though Sarah was physically present. The late-night feedings, the tantrums, the scraped knees, those were all on me. And whenever I brought up how I felt, Sarah turned it into an attack on me. You're always at work, she'd say. Maybe if you were more present, I wouldn't have to take on so much. It felt unfair. She wasn't taking on much of anything, but any attempt to say so led to arguments. I was exhausted. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. The small requests that turned into big demands. The dismissive comments about my efforts. The way she always found a way to make everything about her. But at the time, I thought I was doing what any husband and father would do, putting my family first, even if it meant ignoring the red flags. At that time, our lives looked perfect on the surface. We had a nice house, 2 beautiful kids, and enough money to cover our bills and then some. But underneath, the foundation of our marriage was crumbling. Sarah and I were living separate lives, even though we shared the same roof. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that once the kids were older, things would settle down, that Sarah would find her way back to being the woman I fell in love with. But deep down, I knew the truth. Sarah wasn't interested in building a life together anymore. She was only interested in taking what she could, and I was about to find out just how far she'd go to get what she wanted. Over time, the cracks in Sarah's facade grew harder to ignore. It started with the kids. Emma was only 7, bright and curious, with a knack for asking a million questions about everything. Ethan, at 4, was quieter, always shadowing me or clinging to his sister. They were good kids, messy, energetic, occasionally exhausting, but good. Sarah didn't seem to see it that way. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen to find Emma crying, her hands trembling as she tried to pick up pieces of a broken juice glass. Sarah stood over her, arms crossed, her face a mask of irritation. "Are you kidding me, Emma?" she shouted. "Do you even think before you do anything? Or do you just go around breaking things for fun?" I stepped in quickly, kneeling to scoop Emma into my arms. "It's just a glass," I said, my voice as calm as I could manage. "Accidents happen." Sarah shot me a look that could have frozen water. "You always make excuses for her," she said, shaking her head. "No wonder she's so careless." I tried to talk to her about it later, after the kids were in bed. "You can't talk to her like that," I said. "She's a child. She's going to make mistakes." Sarah waved me off. "You're too soft on them," she said. "They'll grow up weak if you keep coddling them." It wasn't an isolated incident. She became extremely verbally, emotionally, and sometimes physically abusive. I started working longer hours, not because I needed the money, but because being at home felt like walking into a minefield. Sarah's moods were unpredictable. Some days, she'd act like nothing was wrong, chatting with her friends on the phone, or planning elaborate vacations we couldn't afford. Other days, the smallest thing, a misplaced toy, a late start to dinner, would send her into a spiral of anger that left everyone on edge. The kids began tiptoeing around her, watching her face for clues about what kind of day it would be. I hated seeing them like that. It wasn't just fear, it was confusion. They didn't understand why their mom, the person who was supposed to love them unconditionally, could be so harsh. And then came what I should have expected, a betrayal. I started noticing hotel charge on our credit card. I was going over the monthly statement late one night when the line item caught my eye. $812 for a 2-night stay at an upscale hotel downtown. I stared at it, trying to remember if she had mentioned anything about a trip. Maybe it was part of the moms group she was always talking about. Maybe it was some sort of spa weekend. But deep down, something didn't feel right. The next day, I asked her about it casually, trying not to sound accusatory. "Hey, what's this hotel charge on the card? Were you away for something I forgot about?" Sarah didn't even blink. "Oh yeah," she said. "It was a girls' weekend with the moms group. We just needed a break from everything." Her answer was too quick, too rehearsed. My intuition told me she was lying, but I didn't press her right then. Instead, I waited until she left for another lunch with friends and started digging. It didn't take long to find the truth. A mutual acquaintance, someone I'd waved to at neighborhood barbecues, someone who had been in my home, had posted photos on social media, pictures of him and Sarah together at the same hotel, holding hands, smiling. I stared at the photos, my hands shaking. Sarah wasn't just smiling. She was glowing, holding hands with someone I had once called a friend. I closed the laptop, my chest tight with rage and betrayal. That night, I waited for her to come home, rehearsing what I would say, knowing this confrontation would change everything. That night, I confronted her. I showed her the photos, laid everything out, and waited for her to explain, to apologize, to at least try to justify what she'd done. She didn't. Instead, she rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "So what?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't need to find excitement elsewhere." The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were true, but because of how little she cared about the hurt she'd caused. I slept on the couch that night, though sleep was a generous term. My mind raced, replaying every moment, every red flag I had ignored, every excuse I had made for her. By morning, my decision was clear. This wasn't a marriage, it wasn't even a partnership. It was a toxic, one-sided arrangement where I gave everything I had, and Sarah took without hesitation. When I told her I wanted a divorce, she didn't react with anger or sadness. She laughed. "Good luck," she said, her voice icy. "You'll never manage without me." But as she turned to walk away, I realized something. I already had been managing. I had been the one holding everything together while she tore it apart. And now, I was ready to let it go. Now here, the crazy thing started. They say divorce is the end of a battle, but for me, it was just the beginning of Sarah's last-ditch attempt to ruin everything I had left. Little did she know, her own mistakes would be her undoing. After Sarah left, the house felt both quieter and heavier. I thought her absence would bring peace, but instead, it brought a hollow kind of tension. The kids were my focus, and they were the only part of my life that felt stable. Everything else seemed to be unraveling. Sarah had always been difficult, but the divorce turned her into someone I barely recognized. She refused to cooperate on anything. Every decision became a battle. Splitting assets, arranging visitation, even figuring out who would keep the dog. For someone who always acted above it all, she was suddenly deeply invested in making my life miserable. She also refused to pay her share of the kids' expenses. When I asked her about splitting daycare or school costs, she'd reply with a smirk, "You wanted them more than I did. You figure it out." It wasn't just hurtful, it was infuriating. Money was tight. With our accounts frozen during the divorce process, I had to rely on friends and family to get by. Every paycheck went toward keeping the lights on and making sure the kids didn't feel the strain. I cut out everything unnecessary. Cable, eating out, even coffee on the way to work. Meanwhile, Sarah seemed to live exactly as she had before. It wasn't long before the kids started asking questions. "Why doesn't Mom live here anymore?" Emma asked one night. She was old enough to understand that something big had changed, but too young to grasp the full picture. I told her what I could. Sometimes grown-ups don't get along the way they should, and it's better for everyone if they live in separate places. Emma nodded, but her eyes were searching for something more. Ethan, on the other hand, didn't ask much. He just clung to me more tightly than ever. Through all of this, Sarah wasn't exactly making an effort to stay connected with the kids. She'd cancel visits last minute, claiming she was overwhelmed or busy with work, though what work she meant was anyone's guess. On the rare weekends she did take them, she treated it more like a chore than quality time. Emma came home once, confused and teary-eyed. "Mom said she didn't have time to play," she told me. "She was on her phone the whole time." I didn't know how to respond. How do you explain to a child that their parent sees them as an inconvenience? I tried my best to fill the gaps Sarah left, throwing myself into every school event, playdate, and bedtime story. It wasn't just for the kids, it was for me. They were my lifeline, the thing that kept me going when everything else felt like it was falling apart. The legal process dragged on longer than I ever imagined, costing me nearly $15,000 in lawyer fees and court appearances. Sarah's lawyer filed delay after delay, arguing over things that didn't even matter. I lost count of the number of nights I stayed up, going through documents and trying to make sense of what she wanted. It wasn't about fairness or even money. It was about control. Eventually, the court sided with me on most issues. I got primary custody of the kids, which felt like a victory, though a bittersweet one. Sarah was ordered to pay child support of $1,200, but she dragged her feet every step of the way. When the payments finally came, they were late and incomplete. One day, as I was going through the mail, I found a letter from her lawyer. Sarah was contesting the child support amount, claiming it was unfair. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. After everything, she still thought she deserved more. I didn't want to be angry. I didn't want to let her take up any more space in my life than she already had. But it was hard not to feel resentment creeping in. Every time I had to explain to the kids why their mom wasn't around, or figure out how to stretch the grocery budget, I felt the weight of what she'd left behind. At that time, I was devastated. My mom was my only supporter. She gave me a sense of relief being there for me. She constantly provided help. She visited each week and stayed until the evening, helping Emma with her homework and reading Ethan a bedtime story. Before leaving, she hugged me and tried to comfort me. "You're doing a great job, you know. We're proud of you." The kids began to look forward to their grandma's visits. Their bond with my mom strengthened, and that provided my kids a sense of family support that Sarah failed to offer. The first year after the divorce was rough, no sugarcoating it. Every day felt like a grind. I woke up early to get the kids ready for school, rushed to work, and then came home to pick them up, cook dinner, and squeeze in as much time with them as I could before bedtime. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest work, and it felt good to finally have control over my life again, even if that control came with a lot of responsibility. Work became my second anchor. My boss, who'd been understanding throughout the divorce, gave me flexibility when I needed it. I started taking on projects that excited me again, pouring my energy into creating things that made me proud. Financially, things were tight, but I learned to live within my means. I traded in Sarah's old luxury SUV for a reliable hatchback and canceled the memberships and subscriptions we didn't need. The first time I balanced my budget and saw a little left over, I felt a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in years. Around this time, I started opening myself up to the idea of dating again, though cautiously. It wasn't about replacing Sarah. It was about finding someone who shared the same values, someone who saw family as a partnership. I wasn't in a rush, but the idea of sharing my life with someone again didn't feel so impossible anymore. I met a wonderful girl, Jennifer, and eventually remarried after 1 year of the divorce and found the stability Sarah's chaos never allowed. Back then, I reviewed the court documents and noticed there was a box that would have stopped spousal support if I remarried, but it wasn't checked. So, I figured I was in the clear. I decided not to pursue a share of Sarah's retirement, even though I could have, dividing assets like a 401k, which would have legally entitled me to part of it. Instead, I let it go and just took the remaining year of spousal support, $12,000 in total. The support had only been ordered for 2 years, so it felt fair enough to me. I thought that chapter was closed for both of us. Ehor. After a week, I received a letter from Sarah's lawyer, delivered on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I had just finished preparing dinner when I found the envelope sitting on the counter where Emma had left the mail. At first, I thought it was another delay tactic regarding her overdue child support. However, Sarah was suing for sole custody of Emma and Ethan. Her claims were as ridiculous as they were infuriating. According to the paperwork, I had manipulated the children into resenting her and had actively poisoned their relationship with her. Sarah demanded full custody, with me relegated to visitation every other weekend. She also wanted me to cover her legal fees, citing emotional distress caused by my supposed interference. When I shared the news with my lawyer, she wasn't surprised. "It's a textbook move," she said, "usually a way to regain leverage. She probably doesn't even want full custody. It's a power play." It didn't matter whether Sarah's motives were genuine or strategic. The thought of her taking the kids away, especially after everything we'd been through, was unbearable. Emma and Ethan, now 12 and 9, had grown up in a stable, loving environment since the divorce. Sarah had been in and out of their lives inconsistently, showing up when it suited her, and canceling plans when it didn't. The weeks leading up to the hearing were filled with tension. I explained the situation to Emma and Ethan as gently as I could, without going into too much detail. "Mom wants to spend more time with you," I said carefully, "and the court is going to help us figure out what's best." In court, Sarah presented herself as a doting, devoted mother who had been unfairly pushed out of her children's lives. She claimed I had turned them against her, and that she was simply trying to repair the damage I had caused. "I love my kids more than anything," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "But they've been brainwashed to hate me." Her demands were clear and aggressive. She wanted sole legal and physical custody, leaving me with minimal visitation. She also requested a reduction in her child support payments, arguing that she would be the primary caregiver and therefore shouldn't have to contribute financially. To top it off, she sought reimbursement for her legal fees, which were conveniently estimated at just under $15,000. The reality Sarah ignored was that her relationship with Emma and Ethan had faltered because of her own actions, or lack thereof. My lawyer presented a detailed timeline of Sarah's missed visitations, canceled plans, and sporadic involvement. We included text messages where she had bailed on weekends with excuses ranging from, "I'm too tired," to, "I need some me time." One message in particular caught the judge's attention. It was from a few months earlier when Sarah had canceled yet another weekend visit. "I can't do this right now. Tell the kids I'll make it up to them, but I need to focus on myself for a bit." When it was my turn to testify, I focused on the kids. I described their routines, their schools, their hobbies. I talked about how Emma had started excelling in science and how Ethan had recently joined a soccer team. I explained how I had been the one attending parent-teacher conferences, taking them to doctor's appointments, and reading bedtime stories every night. The court also heard from Emma and Ethan directly, something I had been nervous about but ultimately agreed to because it was important for their voices to be heard. Emma's words were measured but powerful. "I love my mom," she said, looking directly at the judge, "but she doesn't really spend time with us. Dad's the one who's always there. He's the one who makes sure we're okay." Ethan, shy as always, spoke softly, but with conviction. "I want to stay with Dad," he said simply. Sarah's lawyer tried to discredit their statements, suggesting I had influenced their opinions. But the judge wasn't buying it. The facts were clear. Sarah's involvement in the kids' lives had been inconsistent at best, and her sudden push for custody felt more like an attempt to regain control than a genuine desire to be a better parent. The proceedings took weeks, during which Sarah's anger only grew. Remember, it was during one of these sessions that she discovered I had remarried a year earlier. She hadn't paid much attention to my personal life until that moment, but when my remarriage was brought up as part of a financial disclosure, her face turned red with fury. "You've been taking spousal support this whole time?" She hissed at me outside the courtroom. "You owe me that money." The irony was almost laughable. Sarah had failed to check the box during the divorce to end spousal support upon remarriage, a mistake entirely of her own making. But now, she acted as though I had stolen from her. The judge ultimately ruled in her favor on the spousal support repayment, ordering me to return the $12,000 I had received after remarrying. However, in the same breath, the judge increased Sarah's child support obligation to $2,200 a month. It ended up that I got extra $1,000 a month through minor adjustments, and she repaid herself by dropping her claim to my car. In return, I agreed to let her have 2 extra weeks of summer visitation with our kids, which seemed like a fair trade. When the final ruling was announced, Sarah's demeanor shifted. She dropped her demand for sole custody in exchange for 2 extra weeks with the kids during summer vacations. She framed it as a gracious compromise. "I'm doing this for the kids," she said with an air of martyrdom, as though she were making a noble sacrifice. For me, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about preserving the life Emma and Ethan had come to know, a life filled with stability, love, and routine. Sarah's attempt to disrupt that had failed, but it left scars nonetheless. However, I kept in mind that Sarah wasn't the type to let go without taking one last shot. It started with a passing comment from my lawyer during a routine check-in. "You know, you're still entitled to half of Sarah's retirement account," she said, almost casually. I had waived my claim to it during the divorce, hoping to keep things amicable at the time. But after years of her games, unpaid child support, and relentless drama, I wondered if it was time to revisit that decision. At first, I hesitated. Going after Sarah's retirement felt like stirring up trouble when things were finally calm. But whenever I thought about it, it felt like the right thing to do. Not out of spite, but as a way to hold her accountable for years of reckless behavior. This wasn't about revenge. It was about fairness. When I filed the motion, Sarah's reaction was as explosive as I'd expected. She called me almost immediately. "Are you serious? You're coming after my retirement now? You really are pathetic." I stayed calm. "This is what I'm legally entitled to," I said. "It's not about you. It's about doing what's right for the kids and their future." Sarah, of course, didn't see it that way. She mocked me at every turn, calling me bitter, petty, and obsessed. During one particularly heated exchange in court, she said, "This is why you'll never be happy. You can't let things go." Her tactics to delay the process were relentless. She ignored court orders, claimed she didn't have the funds, and dragged the case out for years. At one point, she even argued that she had spent most of the account, though bank statements quickly disproved that claim. Each court hearing felt like a battle. Sarah would arrive with her usual smugness, often making snide comments loud enough for me to hear. "Still chasing crumbs?" she said once, smirking as she walked past me. But I stayed focused. I wasn't there to engage with her games. I was there to secure what was owed, not just for me, but for the future I was building for Emma and Ethan. Finally, after nearly 4 years, the court ruled in my favor. I was awarded 50% of Sarah's retirement account, a figure that ended up being significantly larger than I'd anticipated. I had expected around $12,000 based on the original estimates, but after reviewing the updated statements, the court ordered Sarah to pay me just over $48,000. The news didn't sit well with Sarah or her new fiancé, who had entered the picture during the latter half of the proceedings. He sent me an email shortly after the ruling, accusing me of ruining their future and calling me vindictive. My response was simple. Sarah made her choices, and these are the consequences. I told him that if he really wanted to marry her and protect his assets, they could get a prenup so he wouldn't have to worry about it. He said he shouldn't have to sign a prenup because I robbed them. I didn't give him that much thought. Last thing I wanted to care about was Sarah's stuff. The payout allowed me to do something I dreamed of for years. Set up college savings accounts for Emma and Ethan. It wasn't enough to cover everything, but it was a start. Knowing that I could give them a better foundation for their futures was worth every frustrating moment in court. As for Sarah, the ruling hit her harder than I think she ever expected. Her social media, once filled with pictures of extravagant outings and updates about her dream wedding, became quieter. Mutual friends mentioned she had started complaining about financial stress, though I didn't pay much attention. For me, life moved on in the best way possible. Jennifer and I continued to grow together, building a home filled with love and stability. Emma blossomed into a confident teenager, excelling in school and dreaming of becoming a writer. Ethan found his footing on the soccer field, his quiet determination shining through in every game. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Ethan asked, "Dad, are you happy now?" The question made me realize just how far we'd come. "Yeah," I said, smiling at him. "I really am." Looking back, Sarah's choices had always been about taking money, taking time, taking control. But life has a way of balancing the scales. Her greed, her refusal to take responsibility, it all came back to her in the end. For me, it wasn't about winning. It was about creating a life where my kids could thrive, where they could feel loved and supported, and where we could move forward without the weight of Sarah's chaos dragging us down. In the end, Sarah's greed led her to exactly where she is now, on the outside looking in. And while I don't celebrate her struggles, I don't pity her either. You play greedy games, you win greedy prizes. But for me and my family, we've won something far greater. We've won peace.